Traders, how are you? Marcello, founder of the Day Trading Academy. Today we're doing the recap of what happened in the markets last week. So overall this week, the markets were generally lower. Had a variety of things that affected the markets, same as the previous weeks. The China slowdown, world economic outlook, which is not as good as before. We also had a situation where, we have a trade deal, we don't have a trade deal, Brexit as well. So overall for the week, the indices in the US are actually lower. The Dow is down 0.46%, the S&P 500 is down 0.32%, and the NASDAQ 0.25%. You guys can see, as I mentioned to you last year, that we weren't going to have these huge runs up anymore like we had before. So overall, we're either getting really... It's a bit of an indication of what's going to come, because generally when we don't have, it's like the eye before the storm, right? When we have very small gains or small losses, eventually there's going to be a breakout in volatility. And if I'm not mistaken, last week, the week before actually, the 10th to the 16th of November was the lowest volatility on record. So I always tell you guys, if we have one extreme, we can't have everything normal without the other extreme, right? The market has to balance out. The European markets, or the overseas market news, starting with the European markets, mixed as well. One of the big things is the decision about being able to place the tariffs on the autos that are coming from Europe. That affected the European markets overall this week. On Tuesday, the world shares touched their highest in nearly 2 years after a lot of investors are maintaining their bets that the trade deal is going to continue with US and China. The biggest loser overall for the week in Europe is Italy at 1.41% negative. The winners were generally minimal, right? 0.2, 0.4, 0.7, things like that. And then Latin American markets, we had obviously Venezuela's in trouble. We got riots, and we had a riot in Colombia on Thursday. It's so beautiful down here. They actually planned the protest, right? We're going to protest on this day, so make sure you do your flights and your surgeries and everything around this date. And it didn't really escalate that much, other than the fact that 3 people did die on the protest. Chile and Bolivia, however, are continuing, so those haven't abated just yet. Overall in Latin America, the Santiago index was down 2.77%, and then the biggest winner was the Merval in Argentina at 5.45%. African and Middle Eastern markets are mostly mixed. The biggest loser was Egypt at 3.20%. The Saudi Arabia biggest winner, 1.75. And then in Asia and the Far East, the Kospi was the biggest negative at 2.85%, with most of the markets being negative. And the Philippines, shout out to all the traders that are taking the masterclass this weekend, 1.38%. Our group of traders out there in the Philippines is starting to grow quite a bit. Great to see that. In Bitcoin and other cryptocurrency news, this was going to be the year. It's so funny. Whether you love or hate Bitcoin, one of the things that I've noticed is as soon as it starts to go up, everybody, the analyst, everybody, yeah, it's going to go to 50K. This is going to be it. And then it never makes it. Well, it doesn't make it, right? Because it's always going to be this one. And then it ends up going down. Overall, for the week, we had a situation where in the crypto markets, China, the central bank in China, launched a fresh crackdown of the cryptocurrencies. It reached a low of just under 7,000 after reaching a year-to-date high in June of about 13,000. And overall this week, it went down 18.18% to about 7,298 with 18 cents. In finance and banking news, the move upward in U.S. stocks spurred rising trade optimism, diminishing fears of a recession, even though while the Fed expands its balance sheets, even though they're not calling it QE4, it's not QE4. And the People's Bank of China, the Central Bank of China, PBOC, lowered its key interest rates for the first time in 2015, signaling a lot of monetary easing across the globe by central banks. And one of the things that's really interesting that's going to happen overall is we're going to have the economic recession, the contraction. Most likely it's going to be after the elections in 2020. What most likely will happen is, Trump and the Republicans want to try and continue to make the economy humming along to be able to make sure they secure the election. Because if the economy does well, or there isn't that much bad news, then they have a better chance of winning in 2020, right? But if we go into a recession in January, for example, it's not going to be good news for Trump. So after the elections is when I'm anticipating more bad news. Then after the elections in 2020, that's when we'll have a situation where we'll actually see the confirmation of the recession. Then the governments around the world will try to do the same thing that they tried to do in 2008 and 2009, procure more debt to be able to stimulate the economy. Obviously, since they've been doing that for the last 10 years, it's not going to be that effective, and then we're going to have the debt crisis. And then after that, we'll probably have a situation where maybe a war with Iran or something a little bit more serious. So we'll see how this kind of ends up. But many of you guys have asked me, well, when's the crisis coming, right? Because I've just been waiting it for forever. I've been talking about it forever. You can't go 10 years with expansion without a contraction. That's important to note. On average, since the beginning of the Republic in the United States, we had a recession, economic contraction. It can be a recession, a crisis, like the one in 2008, 2009, a depression like in 1929. Contraction happens every 4 to 6 years on average. We're in the 10th year now. Record growth, record days in the market going up, record. We cannot continue to go like this without having the balance out, right? So it's going to swing back to the other extreme and then balance out. So the next 10 years, I don't anticipate to be very good for, let's say, the world overall. Other than that, Latin American currencies eased midweek as well due to the escalation of the U.S. and China trade tensions. The peso in Chile went down for the third consecutive day due to the anti-government protests continuing. Commodities, crude oil futures, the U.S. crude went up 0.09%. International Brent went down 0.09%. So generally flat for those. Saudi Arabia decided to set a valuation of $1.6 trillion to $1.7 trillion, just below the true $2 trillion that they wanted. And it's going to be close to the world's largest IPO, which was Alibaba's deal in 2014 for $25 billion. Precious metals for the week are down. Gold 0.48%. Silver actually went up 0.12%. The miners, however, as I talked to you guys a lot about that, so you can see the progression of those actually went down quite a bit. So I'm going to start looking for entries now. Remember, this is just educational purposes. I'm not telling you what to buy, what to sell. We're not trading advisors. We don't trade people's money. Just want to make sure we get that beautiful government disclosure that we have to tell you guys all the time. Political news. Israel's Attorney General has officially indicted Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on corruption charges on Thursday. Now there's a lot of uncertainty who's going to run the country. And Brazil's President Bolsonaro is going to launch a new political party on Thursday called the Alliance for Brazil, which may fragment his political base. In economic news, Germany's export-reliant manufacturing production is expected to decline 4% in 2019. Exports are edging just half a percentage point, even though there's weaker foreign demand. And obviously this is because of the main things that are in the news: the trade war, China's slowing economy, and the uncertainty around Brexit. U.S. home sales are higher than expected in October, with existing home sales up 1.9%, seasonally adjusted annual rate of 5.46 million units. The house prices rose at the fastest pace in the last 2 years, with lower mortgage rates and shortage of property. So housing is big. That's why we always include it in the weekly recap, because it's a big portion of the economy. If I remember, it's just under 20%. Don't quote me on that. If you guys have the number, just put it there in the comments. But it's not only the selling of the houses. Imagine the service industry for the mortgages, the banks, the construction workers. It's a huge percentage of the economy. In corporate news, WeWork's plans to slash up to 1/3 of its jobs, 2,400 jobs, just as they gave the previous CEO that ruined the country over $1 billion to be able to leave the country, to leave the company alone. They lost $1.25 billion in Q3, which is up over 150% since Q3 in 2018. So he gets over $1 billion because he did such a horrible job. Let's talk about the corruption in this country. Target reported Q3 higher same sales stores and online sales. It's raised its guidance for Q4 of this year. Quarter 3 versus 2008, quarter 3 same store sales grew 4.5%. Income was up 15%, 1.5, and the stock was up 11% on Wednesday. It's gained 86% this year alone, which is one of the leading stocks in the S&P 500 this year. Alibaba Group raised up to $12.9 billion in the landmark listing in Hong Kong, even though they obviously continue to have the protests as well that escalated this week with the police going into universities. So that's not abating as well. It's the largest share sale in the city in 9 years for Alibaba in Hong Kong, and it has marked a world record for cross-border secondary stock sales. Schwab is going to buy TD Ameritrade for $26 billion. The entire sector is under pressure to the whole no-fee commissions. If you guys don't know what this means, even though it's no fees, doesn't mean that it's free, right? There's nothing free in this business. Robinhood, which was the famous kind of startup that gave commission-free stock buying and selling, was actually selling your positions to the HFTs. The HFTs, if you guys don't know, is the algorithms that go in and make the stocks more expensive for us. I'll give you a quick example just to kind of run it down for you. Huge pension fund wants to buy gold. They tell the broker, hey, I want to buy gold at the best price possible. They put in the order. The HFT, the high frequency trading program, comes in at the price that we wanted. Since it's not a limit price, they just say, order, fill me at the best price. So we would have got this price, but the order comes in from the computer algorithm, and then he literally gets that difference, and then we end up getting this much instead of this much. So that's essentially how they make money. So they don't charge you on the front end, they're charging you on the back end, which is not bueno, because obviously we lose a lot more money on the back end. So it's leaving brokers that are offering these no-fee commissions looking for ways to maintain profits. Schwab and TD Ameritrade are two of the biggest publicly traded discount brokers. It's going to buy out the firm to create $5 trillion in combined assets and may create a regulatory issue. Hopefully it'll create a regulatory issue, because I have TD Ameritrade after TD Ameritrade bought Scottrade, and I really don't like these huge conglomerates. So we'll see where that ends up at. The global economy has narrowly avoided a recession, with most industrial and financial indicators pointing to a slight improvement in September and October after the sharp slowdown in the middle of 2019. World trade volumes, however, have the worst performance since the recession in 2008 and 2009. Japan's lower house parliament passed a limited trade deal after Prime Minister Abe of Japan agreed with a deal with the United States. So that clears the way for tariff cuts next year, including U.S. farm goods and Japanese machine tools, but no resolution on the U.S. auto tariffs. Obviously, Japan is protecting its auto industry because it's so big for Japan, but the U.S. wants to enter into the Japan market as well. Phase 1 of the trade agreement between the U.S. and China may not complete it until next year. In technology, Tesla's battery project with Neoen in South Australia became the largest battery in the world after it was completed 2 years ago. It's now expanding by 50% to 150 megawatts. After the first year it was open, it saved more than 50 million Australian dollars. It was roughly about 60 million Australian dollars that it cost to build, so it's already making money very, very quickly. And a startup with financial backing by Bill Gates, now again the richest man in the world, Heliogen, a clean energy firm, supposedly discovered a way to use artificial intelligence and a field of mirrors to reflect so much sunlight that it generates extreme heat above 1,000 degrees Celsius, 1,832 Fahrenheit. This is important because if it's true, that it might revolutionize the actual green energy field, which everybody's moving into, it seems, in the recent years. In investment news, raising capital in 2019 is since its lowest level in 2012 due to the notorious pull deals like WeWork and the poor performances of Uber and Lyft. U.S. is going to issue another 90-day extension to Huawei allowing U.S. firms to do business with Huawei. Huawei spent $70 billion buying components in 2018, of which $11 billion went to U.S. firms. In Germany, the BDI Industry Association, the most influential business lobbying group, and a union group called DGB. It's think of it like an umbrella that houses a lot of trade unions. They very rarely had a joint statement stating that the government should rethink its budget priorities. Germany is, if you guys remember, one of the only ones that has a surplus, so they're spending a lot less than they're taking in, and they're using the extra money to pay down their federal debt. One of the only countries, if not the only country in the world to do so, as the responsible Germans are planning for the future due to the aging population. So what these companies want is the government to spend more money on the economy to avoid, quote unquote, the deteriorating economy that Germany has right now. In international events this week, violence in Hong Kong is escalating. I told you guys about that already. The Iran's Revolutionary Guards, IRG, warned that the anti-government protesters are not going to be permitted on Monday. There's going to be decisive action, they said, if there is a lot of unrest. This is due to the fuel rationing, so everybody's not able to get gasoline, for example, and price rises of at least 50% if they do not cease. So this is the problem for Iran, and this is essentially what kind of the U.S. wants, right? They place the sanctions, the people try to overthrow the government, but obviously due to the fact that it's a military government, so to speak, not the easiest of governments to overthrow. Kind of like what the government in the U.S. supposedly, due to the conspiracy theories, did in Bolivia. Ukraine President Zelensky wants to negotiate a clear timeline for the return of the eastern provinces, the eastern territories in his country, and also the return of people in Russia. There's a four-way summit that they want to be able to have to the end to the Donbass conflict in December. A summit between Ukraine, Russia, France, and Germany, and they're deeming Crimea lost after Russia essentially annexed it 2 years ago. So they're just deciding that they're not going to be able to get that back. Israel claims aircraft struck dozens of Iranian Syrian military targets in Syria as they retaliated rockets fired towards Israel earlier. And Syria is saying that its air defenses stopped most of the missiles fired by Israeli jets over Damascus. And Colombia, I told you about the manifestations and the protests that happened in Colombia as well. Bolivia is continuing as well. They want the new president to step down after the old president also had to step down. Venice, an interesting fast this week. Venice in Italy is suffering its worst week of flooding in its history with a tidal surge as the sea's water levels break records. Some obviously are saying that this is due to the global climate change. One of the things that's super interesting that I mentioned last week is the global seas have been rising since the Ice Age in 10,000 BC, before Christ. So kind of interesting to see. There was no carbon or industry back then, but the water was actually increasing. So it's interesting to kind of think about that. I talked about that in the last week as well. But either way, whatever the reason is, they are affecting 70% of the city, as 70% of the city is submerged. PG&E is ready to engage in more power shutoffs for 180,000 customers in California. It wishes to avoid igniting or spreading a new wildfire. And also in Southern California, Edison is warning that windy conditions may force shutoffs for 32,000 customers. The U.S., for the most part, is backing now Israel's exclusive right to build Jewish settlements in the occupied West Bank. This is abandoning a 4-decade-old position that's inconsistent with international law, and a new stance now that's going to make peace more elusive, if at all possible. Apple is starting to build a new $2 trillion campus in Austin. It's going to be $1 billion to make the new MacBook Pro laptop with 3 million square feet. It's going to house 5,000 employees with a capacity to grow to 15,000 in 2022. And Uber is having trouble in London. If they're not going to be granted a new license, they could have only a few more days to operate. It employs 45,000 drivers in the London area in 2017. And the Transport for London is saying that the reason why they're taking away their license is because they're failed to adequately give driver background checks and report serious criminal offenses. In British as well, 2 British metal detectorists failed to declare a Anglo-Saxon treasure of about $3.8 million for nearly 20 years are going to be jailed. And this is against the law in Britain, because once you find something like that, you have to report it to the coroner, and also you have to report it to the owner of the land. It's about $3.8 million from Alfred the Great, which is about the mid-800s. Tesla unveiled its amazingly designed Cybertruck. I could have designed a better truck, guys. Hopefully it'll go well for them. They're saying that it's going to start at $39,900. The presentation was a bit went awry, let's say, as they're saying that the armored glass vehicle would hold up, and they threw a round metal ball at it and both of the windows cracked. That was really funny. And Vietnam is a large beneficiary of the China-U.S. trade war. In the first 9 months of 2019, U.S. imports from the country increased by 34.8% year on the year. It gained only 5.8% in 2018. And the imports from mainland China shrank 13.4% year over year in the same period. Many large U.S. firms now are leaving mainland China and putting their factories in Vietnam due to the trade war. That's the news for this week, guys. Let me know if you guys have any questions. Hashtag Ask Marcello. Don't forget to subscribe. We'll see you next week.